Well, welcome everyone. Good to have so many of you joining us. I think we counted about 20 different countries signing in today.
Yeah, of which 18 is in Europe. So we welcome Africa, wherever you're from as well. Probably not Africa, but you're welcome if you're from there. Wow, this is fun.
So who have we got? Where are some people coming from? Catherine, you're in Greece. What other countries have we got there? We could put it in the chat even. Why don't you use the chat function there, and you could type in the country that you're speaking to us from. Serbia, Wales, Netherlands, Scotland, in the UK, Spain. There you go, great.
Yeah. So it's 2:30 my time anyway. I'm in Denmark. So should we just get started, Johnny?
I think so. That'd be great, Tove. Yeah.
Yeah, so welcome to this Futurewise. To start with, we said we are going to have it 4 times a year, but we realized, wow, people, they are not too keen around summer vacation, nor around Christmas. So we've cut it down to 3 a year. So this is our 3rd this year. And it has just been amazing. We have had some amazing speakers. I'm very much looking forward to today as well. Futurewise, it is part of the European Leaders Learning Community. So it's this summit, that is part of that. But the European Leaders Learning Community, I think most of you that are online today, you have come across it somehow. That might be where you have found this event as well. We have events, or you can say training, going on all month, and every month there's a certain theme. The next theme coming up, or actually the one we are in, I should say, that's on hospitality. But we've had many different themes, and there will be small TED Talk type input, as well as articles, as well as discussions around different topics. We have people come into a leadership lounge, people that are have a speciality in certain area, and they are sharing from their wealth of experience in that area. So it's just a great community. And if you're not part of it, I'd like to invite you to it. We have a Facebook group as well of over 1,000 members in there. So it's leaders across Europe where we can just share the wealth of information and strengthen one another as well. So yeah. So Johnny, you are introducing a very special person to you, I know.
Hi everyone.
Did you just freeze on that?
Yeah.
Johnny?
Have I frozen?
I believe he's to introduce it.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yeah, Johnny, you're good.
Okay,
Tove's frozen, but you're good.
Okay. I just changed networks, so we've just got fiber optic broadband on our YWAM base, so hopefully our internet connection is going to be good. So yeah, like Tove said, it's great to have so many of you joining from around the world, or around Europe especially. And as Tove said, these Futurewise gatherings, this is the 3rd event that we've run. It's a kind of a real decision of ours to kind of contemplate the future and to prepare ourselves as YWAMers for what the future brings, and to be wise about the future, and to kind of get a perspective, God's perspective, if you like. During the last couple of events, we've started with a 20-minute reflection. And the first event, we had Brother Thierry from the Benedictine Monastery up the road from me here in Rostrevor, Northern Ireland. At our second event, we had Jill Hines, who works with 24/7 prayer in the Methodist Church, doing fresh expressions. And today I do have a special guest, is my wife over to the left. She does speak at things. but this is the first time she's showed up on Futurewise. So Jen, if I say a couple of things about her, she's a storyteller. She's very wise. She walks into a room, she fills it with animated fun and life, but is also a deep thinker and got a real deep kind of mystical, beautiful spirituality. She finds God in very real ways that inspires me. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jen to lead us in a bit of a kind of reflection and meditation time that will hopefully center our whole time this afternoon on God and on his heart for us. So as we then will go on and we'll hear later on in the afternoon from Roy Searle, who I think is a real significant voice to the body of Christ here in Europe and around the world. So we're looking forward to what Roy's got to bring. But without further ado, I'm going to hand this screen over to Jen. I was going to have two different computers, but I'm just going to put it there.
Just going to put it like this. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. I've sort of watched. Are you happy to sit there? Okay. I've sort of watched Johnny been, contributing to these things and helping lead them. So it's wonderful to be able to be with you a little bit. So we're just going to do a short sort of reflection and kind of. Do you use this? Do I put them in? All right. Short time of reflection on something that's been very important to me in my the last wee while in my own sort of spiritual practice and discipline, and that is the spiritual practice of silence and solitude and contemplation. And I think it's important to be mindful that solitude is not loneliness. Solitude is a space of welcoming to what I kind of like to call the fireside of your own heart. And in those times of intimate encounter with ourselves and with the Spirit and with God in us, I think has at least been for me a truly powerful type of way for me to untether myself to this world and tether myself to God, which is what we're all sort of in this mission, all doing, all of us here in YWAM in the field. So is that good? So I'm just going to start. So start by praying, if that's okay. And I would encourage you in the next little bit to find a place where you're comfortable. Many of you might be in a home office or somewhere, but if you find a chair that's comfortable, find maybe your favorite chair. We're sitting in our living room, which is lovely, with a nice cup of tea. So I'd encourage you to make yourself likewise as comfortable. So, and I'm just going to read this. So, Spirit, welcome. God, we thank you that you are love in all abundance and that you are the source of all things good. And you've created us to live life in that love. We recognize the privilege it is to meet together. And we ask that your Holy Spirit come saturate each one of the rooms that we're in. And even though we're physically apart, we're connected by spirit, by family, by heritage, and by calling. Amen. So as the world awakens from a long but disruptive sleep of COVID, we're left asking ourselves many questions. In the last 18 months, humanity has collectively endured one of the most intense and bizarre periods in history. We as people are designed for things like human connection, community, empathy, engagement. And for many of you and for me, I've been doing the best that I know how this last while. And as our children returned to school a few months ago, we have 3 boys. My eldest
we were navigating the new and bizarre sort of terrain of mask wearing and one-way systems and all of that, and all of the anxiety that goes with returning to normal life after something like COVID or after a pandemic, and the various ways that's impacted us. And as our children returned to school a few months ago, my eldest son, I think, quite articulately described his own experience of COVID anxiety. He said he described it as a constant hum of noise in the background, a sound that is just sort of there all the time, but one that you struggle to pinpoint. You can't quite put your finger on it. And so this is how we've been living. For many of us, our programs and our projects and programs and things were canceled or they were delayed. The numbers of participants and trainees for those programs were absolutely slashed. We were stopped from traveling, which is for many of us a huge part of our calling and our vocation. We were stopped from traveling. We were stopped from speaking to large groups. We were stopped from gathering in groups together. And now we're slowly returning to normal, as if some of our lives were ever that to start with. And now it's up to us here to bear witness to what it was and to ask ourselves, how are we meant to live? What are we willing to return to? And what are we happy to leave behind? We have been given the chance to restart. We've been given the chance to return to factory settings, as it were. But like many things, this opportunity will pass like a stranger if we don't stop to welcome it. The world outside is pounding on the door of our hearts and our minds, shouting at us to get back to work, to get back to spending money, to get back to consuming, to get back to producing, to get back to traveling, to get back to being productive. But for me, I found that I believe that God's answer to that is the same as his answer was to Elijah in the desert in 1 Kings, where we know God's voice, it wasn't in the wind. God's voice wasn't in the earthquake or in the fire. God's voice was in the whisper. And the thing with whispering is that you must be attuned to listening for it, or else it'll get lost in the background. And I want us to be attuned to the whisper of God today, to be attuned to the silence, to be familiar with solitude, which, like I said before, is not loneliness. In fact, solitude and a deep understanding, the gift that solitude is quite exactly the opposite to loneliness. Where we can be away from ego, where we can be away from busyness and expectations and programs and meetings that are all pounding on the door of our hearts. So I want to invite you into yourself, to the warm fireside of your own heart, to lay down thoughts and the shouts at the door, and to turn our heads to the gentle whisper and the stillness that leads into ourselves and into God. So nothing in all creation is like God as stillness is. And if you're like me, you struggle to find time to be still. For me, it is truly a discipline. My mom said I came into this world running, burning both candles at both ends, and I haven't really slowed down. But for me, integrating this practice of an appreciation for stillness, for silence, for solitude, for contemplation, has opened myself up to me and introduced me to myself and introduced me to the God in my heart. And that's what I want for a little bit for us today. John O'Donohue says that stillness is a vital world of the soul. And if you age, as we're all doing, myself included, if you age and become more still, you will discover that stillness can be a great companion, a very good friend. The fragments of your life will have time to unify, and the places where you're wounded and broken will have time to knit and to heal. You will be able to return to yourself. In this stillness, you will engage with your soul, and many people miss out on themselves completely on their journey through life. They know others, they know places, they know skills, they know their work, but they tragically do not know themselves at all. So aging can be a lovely time of ripening when you actually meet yourself, and maybe for the first time. And there are beautiful lines from one of my favorite poets, T.S. Eliot, that says, "At the end of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know that place for the first time." So I want all of us to make sure that we're comfortable. And I just want to welcome you to feel the Spirit in the stillness, wherever you are, in your own solitude, as many of us are in, obviously separated, lots of different places all over Europe and the world, but we're here together, united in calling and vocation and making space. So I'm inviting you to make space at the fireside of your own heart. And as I do that, I want to welcome you to my fireside. This is our lovely fireside. So I hope you're as cozy and as comfortable as we are here together. So just find a place to be still, quiet, and comfortable. If you'd like to, I'd welcome you to close your eyes as I just pray this prayer that can kind of unite us in spirit and purpose. So we all take a big deep breath in through our nose. I like to say to my children, it's in through your inhale the strawberries, blow out the candle. That's what I love. So we welcome you, Spirit. Help us to feel your presence like the weight of the space around us. Help us to open up and to become comfortable at the fireside of our own hearts. We'll welcome you, Spirit, to come meet us where we are. Give us the courage to shut the door to the demands and the expectations of the world that will never stop asking us, and have the courage to meet ourselves and to meet you in this intimate space in the fireside of our own hearts. So I want you to begin by just feeling the Spirit weigh on you. I want you to start at the top of your head and feel the top of your head. Feel your ears. Feel the space behind your eyes. Breathe in. Exhale. Unclench your jaw. Feel your neck and your shoulders. Feel the space rolling down to your arms, down to your fingers. Feel your fingertips. Feel the space just beyond your fingertips. Unwind your back. Move down your hips into your legs. Breathe in. Exhale. Feel your feet on the floor. Feel the weight of your feet resting on the floor. Breathe again deeply through your nose. Exhale through your mouth. Imagine a cycle of breath through your body. The breath of the Spirit, as close and as intimate as the air that we're breathing. Feel the closeness of the Spirit. And the thoughts that come into your head, take them out. Lay them like stones, one by one, into a pile at the feet of Jesus. And as you breathe in, feel your head and your neck and your shoulders and your fingertips and your back, hips, legs, knees, ankles, feet, toes. Breathe in the Spirit. And as you exhale, say thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the welcome and the warmth of the Spirit. Thank you for the welcome and the warmth we have together as community. Thank you for the welcome and the warmth we find in ourselves by the fireside of our own hearts. Thank you for the closeness and the warmth and welcome of the Spirit. And as you said, we would be like trees planted by streams of living water. We feel our roots go down like an oak tree, deep into the soil, deep down. We stretch our limbs and twist to reach water and the nourishment that you give us through your Spirit. Thank you for the gift of stillness. We thank you for the gift of silence. And indeed, we thank you for the gift of solitude. Thank you, Spirit. God, we ask that in this holy space between us, we can come and welcome each other into the fireside of our own hearts. Help us to be attuned to the whisper, to the quiet, and to the stillness that you call us into, away from the expectations of the world, away from the things that we need to prove to each other, away from the things we think we need to prove to ourselves. Invite us to this space to be and to listen in the stillness of your Spirit. Amen. Thank you.
Hi there, everyone. Thanks, Jen. I hope that that's been a meaningful just beginning for us all as we kind of reflect and allow God and his Holy Spirit to be alive and in our spirit now as we listen and become part of this, the rest of this event. I want to introduce our speaker for this afternoon. Jen and I used to go to a church in Belfast called City Church, and I think it was probably 15 odd years ago that Roy Searle was visiting, and he was the speaker, and I had heard about him and I thought this would be good, but he really blew me away with one of the best sermons I think I've ever heard, just because sometimes you hear a sermon and it hits you right where you need to be, you need to hear. And he spoke that day about the times we're living in and looking to the future, but he also talked about our history. Roy helped to found with others the Northumbria Community, which in that community has produced a resource called the Celtic Daily Prayer. Roy lectures, he's led churches, he's a missional thinker and a pioneer. He's many things, and he's someone that I think has got words that we could really listen to as YWAM, and I'm really excited to hear what he's got to say. So without further ado, I want to hand over to Roy Searle, who I presume you're in the northeast of England somewhere.
I am indeed.
Part of England that St. Aidan was very familiar with, and so I'm going to hand over to you, Roy.
Thank you, folks. Well, in the words of St. Francis as he greeted St. Dominic on the road to Umbria, hi, it's good to be with you. And I bring you greetings from Northumbria, which was once known as a cradle, not the, but a cradle of Christianity. Yeah, it's good to be with you. It's actually about 25 years, I think, since we first met each other, Johnny. And I was middle-aged then, and now I'm old. But it's a great honor and privilege and a joy to be with you today. And I'm going to share my talk in two sections, one of which you might find quite depressing, but hang on in there, because after the coffee break comes some hope. I hope you can see on the screen there some words, the lines of the American lyricist and songwriter Bob Dylan. And he penned those in the 1960s, but my goodness, in 2021, we can truly say the times they are truly changing. A couple more quotes from the amazing Brené Brown. We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than we normalized greed, inequality, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. I don't normally quote Frankie Boyle, but I think he has some tremendous things to say. There's no normal for us to go back to. People sleeping in the streets wasn't normal. Children living in poverty wasn't normal. Neither was our taxes helping to bomb the people of Yemen. Using other people's lives to pile up objects wasn't normal. The whole thing was absurd. Surely it's time to start imagining something better. The moral essayist James Baldwin wrote these words: "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." That's quite a strong word for the nations, but indeed it's a very strong word for our churches and Christian communities at this time. I teach a lot on and do a fair bit of mentoring on the issue of leadership. And I guess this is my favorite definition of leadership from the writer Max Dupre. The first responsibility of as a leader is to define reality. The last is to say thank you. And in between, the leader is a servant. And we need to be men and women, if we are followers of Jesus Christ, to be real about what's happening both in the church and in the world. And I just want us to take a few moments just to kind of survey a little about what's happening in the world of which we are all a part. this remarkable image by the Cambridge artist Issam Koubaj, dark water, burning world. We are living through times where we are seeing the shaking of the world. COVID has disrupted, and goodness me, we don't need to be reminded about the world that is burning up and the famines and floods and catastrophes that many people are experiencing in our world today. I read yesterday David Putnam, who actually lives in Ireland. He spoke at the Shirley Williams lecture the other day, and basically it was his resignation speech. And if you have an opportunity, I would encourage you to look on David Putnam's site and read what is the most amazing lecture that he gave. It's lengthy, it's over 4,000 words. He took 25 minutes to deliver it. It won't take you that long to read it. But some amazing things that he looked across what was happening, particularly in the United Kingdom. But I think these are things that are pertinent for us across the world, and particularly where most of you are in Europe. The rise of popularism and the emergence of extremist groups, the threat of terrorism on a global scale, the challenge of the refugee crisis, global warming, and social media. He said something incredibly challenging about social media in the light of allegations and information that was given by a whistleblower within Facebook, when he was talking about, but none of the folks who own these things and who are the shareholders of social media platforms like Facebook have the bottle to pull back on the productivity and the profits that they're making on the back of how these things work. And he said, this is capitalism quite literally eating its young, messing with people's lives. He goes on to talk about fake news and propaganda. I listened to a lecture yesterday at the Berwick Literary Festival, Berwick-upon-Tweed, which is not far from me, by a guy called Peter Oborne, who talks now about how in politics, fake news has become just the norm. Propaganda, the lessons that were not learned, or rather the principles that were applied by people like Goebbels in 1930s Germany, being used again, not only in Russia, but in parts of Britain. The lies that politicians are allowed to get away with, which, 20 years ago, they would have been forced to resign, but the dispatch boxes, prime minister's questions, other cabinet things, lies that are told as truth. And Putnam, of course, lays heavily into the Brexit lies. The erosion of democracy within the Western world, the tightening of police measures, the data that we all sign up to when we just click on those things when it says, have you read the terms and conditions? But of course, very few of us do. Data in wrong hands. These are our worrying trends for a culture that is changing. Simone Weil talked about this, about living in a rootless society. To be rooted is perhaps the most important and least recognized need of the human soul. It's one of the hardest to find. A human being has roots by virtue of his real, active and natural participation in the life of a community, which preserves in living shape certain particular treasures of the past and certain particular expectations of the future. I work quite closely with a very good friend. One of my cell friends is a psychotherapist. And if you're involved in psychology or psychiatry or psychotherapy, you'll know that one of the big issues facing people in the psychiatrist chair or the counseling session is that of identity and a sense of belonging, which in large measure is related to this sense of rootlessness which people face. Defining reality reminds us that we live in the West, in Europe, in an emerging post-Christendom culture. The erosion, the evaporating of the Judeo-Christian foundations that were laid by our Celtic forefathers and mothers in the faith. The end times, as some people have described it, of Western culture as we know it. The shift from a Christian paradigm to a postmodern, post-Christendom society is upon us. Those narratives that shaped European culture for centuries is now simply one societal story among many. The values that shaped Western culture, values that were rooted in the Christian tradition, now find themselves competing in a marketplace of conflicting and fragmented ideologies. And the dominance of secular humanism, Western capitalist consumerism, and you put that together with individualism, has contributed to the demise of the notion of community and society. And the reality for the church in the West, despite the rhetoric, despite the talk in some quarters of revival, actually, I would suggest, feels more like survival or that of exile. We're moving into uncharted territory. We're moving into a world era we have not seen before. Of course, we can learn from history, and various people throughout generations have had to, go these ways before and explore new territories. Every century, if you look at the history of centuries over the last 2,000 years, you'll see that there's been something that has shaken and changed the world. People will look back on the 20th century and will speak about the two world wars. People, I believe, will look back on the 21st century and talk about the pandemic era. But of course, any understanding of pandemics will realize that one pandemic is not over. We're likely to be living with pandemics for 3, 4, 5 or more years yet. COVID has not gone away. And in the midst of that, we are called to both learn and unlearn and relearn. I'm just reading a fascinating book by a guy called Adam Grant called Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. And, the arrogance with which the West has kind of addressed issues of COVID and the pandemic has been absolutely appalling to observe. And we've had to unlearn things that we've assumed we could just get a hold of and control. And classically, one of these examples, there's a book written by a Lake District farmer called Pastoral Song. And one of the things that the farming community is reluctantly coming to terms with is that actually ploughing, which has been the mainstay of arable farming, ploughing is now deemed to be ecologically disastrous. And Rebank says, this news is staggering and hard to take in for us farmers. Our civilization rests on the plow and the chemical tools of the post-war period, and yet the plow is the problem. And that means changing how we farm and thinking again about the tools we have come to rely on. I think that has huge implications when we think about the church. Always doing the way we've done things, or at least in our Protestant circles, the way in which things were constructed after the period of the Reformation. Another writer who in the 1960s observed peregrine falcon, a pair of peregrines, falcon in East Anglia, said the hardest thing of all to see this is what really is there. And sometimes I did quite a bit of work, consultancy work, advising churches and leadership teams, is simply holding up a mirror to the church as to what is obvious to an outsider, but is not obvious to those of us who are caught up in the mechanisms and institution of church. I'm no particular fan of kind of dystopian apocalyptic scenarios that are caused by some global catastrophe, the premise of which behind such thinking is faced with a disaster. Things will only get worse. Civilization will collapse, society will unravel, communities will disintegrate, and we'll be back to the law of the jungle, everybody for themselves. I think that flies in the face, actually, of the nature of the God whom we have come to know and to love and to serve. It was John F. Kennedy back in the early 60s who, in relation to China, observed this: when written in Chinese, the word crisis composed of two characters, one representing danger and the other representing opportunity. And I think that we have an opportunity in the midst of the terrible crisis and shaking that's going on in the world to actually think about some of the opportunities, have a rethink, to recalibrate. Little example of this. I have 8 grandchildren, and I was at one of my grandchildren's 4th birthday on Saturday in Newcastle, here in the northeast of England. And it was a little earlier this year, because we were able to bubble with that family, and my wife Shirley childminds she and her younger sister. I was able to teach Lyra how to ride a bike. And of course, there came that moment when the stabilizers were removed from her bike and she had to learn to ride unaided with the stabilizers. And I, thinking about that, I think about the church in COVID, in lockdown, that actually I think God removed the stabilizers from our churches during that period. Our stabilizers in most churches being a building in which we meet and do all the stuff that we do, and our worship gatherings. And those churches that were wholly dependent upon having a building, wholly dependent upon gathering together and doing the stuff, found themselves in kind of very difficult, uncharted waters. But some of those churches discovered actually they could be the church as opposed to simply doing church. They discovered what it was to be the church in the neighborhood, what it was to be a dispersed community, and yet gathering together, perhaps on social media and Zoom or WhatsApp groups or whatever. And now with lockdown easing and regulations becoming more relaxed, it's been really heartening for me in my role as a pioneer ambassador with the Baptist denomination here in the UK to see those churches that have not gone back to normal, but have been asking the questions, what does it mean to be the church in a changing world? I don't know if any of you remember the Mr. Men series. I enjoyed reading this to my kids. And here was Mr. Topsy-Turvy. Topsy-turvy is actually a medieval term. It means to turn over or to topple over. And it was flipping the topsoil over and digging it deeper beneath the earth so that it could nourish and replenish the ground underneath. I think it's a lovely image of the possibilities of what might be going on in God's purposes today. We could get quite depressed, and certainly the levels of anger and anxiety are through the roof in relation to people's psyche, in particularly Western society today. Of course, we're having to contend with things that we've not been able to control. We felt for the first time powerless by the implications of the pandemic, of COVID, not only the disease, but the consequences. And yet for brothers and sisters and for people across the other parts of the world, they have lived with such situations of powerlessness. They have lived with uncertainty and vulnerability. And I remember having a conversation with somebody who'd just come back from Aleppo in Syria, and the concern expressed by a pastor in Aleppo for the well-being of people in Britain living with such uncertainty, with such suffering. We could learn a lot from our brothers and sisters in other parts of the world about the folly of our believing that we can control all things. There is another narrative, another story, and it is one of hope. We have the opportunity, I believe, during this present and emerging dark age to discover new and life-giving ways, to discover God's loving purposes, God's good purposes for the world today, that speaks hope in the midst of the shaking of the nations. That the nonsense of trying to live without God, to live in denial or contravention of his ways, is to reap what we've sown. Conflict and war, inequality and injustice, the world burning with its fires and floods and famines, racism, white supremacy, sexism, misogyny, women walking with fear on our streets, domestic violence, abuse, could go on and on. The need for food banks, calling things benefits. And what we're talking about is providing basic necessities for people to live on. The ugly and evil disparity between wealth and poverty. In our own UK, cutting foreign aid, refusing to welcome the stranger, those fleeing from war-torn lands. where we are not innocent bystanders. The hideous amount of money that we raise through the sale of arms, weapons of warfare. You could look at the rise in anxiety, the strains on the public services, rising hate crime across Europe generally, and the partisan attitudes that fuel division and conflict and foster resentment and a loss of respect for anybody who doesn't have the same view that we hold. It's a serious omission, our inability to debate, to discuss, and to discern with others, to talk with people whom we disagree with, who have different outlooks and perspectives. And then we've got the medical professions and schools and colleges and social services, the voluntary sector. They're all on their knees here in the UK, not praying, but exhausted and overwhelmed. And as for the developing nations, the earth's poor, an abandonment on the altar of the wealthiest nations, self and national interest. These are not the signs of God's kingdom. There is another story. Read Ephesians 1-6, another good news story that reminds us of God's loving purposes for the world to bring all things under Christ, under his rule. It's a story of hope and transformation, of redemption, a narrative that can shape the world for good. Now, it's been tough these last couple of years. We look around us, we become painfully aware that we're a frail and wearied humanity, wearied from the countless struggles and threats brought about by COVID and the havoc it's wreaked all over the world, weary from wrestling with unresolved racial tensions and hatred, sick of arguing with opposing ideas on how to care for ourselves and others. If I had a pound or a euro for every church leader who had said to me, how do you cope with all the different expectations, demands, strong opinions of people with our churches, fellowships, and congregations? We need God. We need God. And we need God in this time of shaking. We need to walk humbly, to act justly, to love mercy, so that we can regain once more what it is to live generously and passionately, loving God and neighbor. I believe that in the shaking that has and is taking place, it's a call for us to seek God, to lament, and to worship God, which is not just about gathering. I'm sitting in my new upper room, garden room, in a house that we bought that was built in 1783. It's needed major renovation and building work. So we had lots of tradesmen here. And our builder said the other day, he's not a Christian, and he just said, I just don't get it. Where's the church been in COVID? And I'm saying, well, the church has been doing lots of things locally. But he says, yeah, but you see, what comes across to me, Roy, is that the church is just concerned to getting back and doing what it wants to do. There's so much need in society. And yet it seems that, all the conversation in churches that I hear is about how can we get back? When can we get back? When will we be able to do this? When will we be able to do that? I was able to challenge some of his assumptions. I also felt charged by some of them as well. Our task is not to mirror the attitudes of the world, self-interest, our own interest, but to realize the power of God, the goodness of God and his good news to redeem, to transform, to change the world, so that out of the crisis that the world is facing, we might see new opportunities. And we as the people of God, disciples of Jesus, can contribute something. COVID has brought the very worst out of society, but it's also brought the best out of some people. Solidarity, just when, I'll be political for a moment, just when Britain is going its own way, it's going to be great, but we'll never be Great Britain again. And we'll never be great unless we walk humbly before God and live generously, and as we're blessed, bring blessing to others. But actually the idea of self-interest, national interest, being kind of so concerned for ourselves without any concern for others, is in stark denial of the solidarity that the world needs in order to face the issues that we face. God's great care for the needy comes through the agency of people like you and I, who express something of the love of God, hearts that reflect the nature of God, and hands that express his loving purposes and compassion for the world. Let me end, before we have a little break, with these words from Teresa of Avila. Christ has no body but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks with compassion on his world. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands with which he blesses all the world. Yours are the hands, yours are the feet, yours are the eyes. You are his body. We stand as a world, and certainly in Europe, and indeed on European Day, there was launched, wasn't there, a commission on the future of Europe by the European Parliament. And I think Europe particularly, but the world generally, we're at a crossroads. We stand at the crossroads. This is a critical period. And after this short break, I want to share with you some of the inspiration and wisdom, the positivity and experience of the Celtic saints who lived at a time in history that saw the world changing. And with the advent of dark ages, God raised up a movement that brought light and hope to the world and shaped European society and the wider world for good. But that's a trailer for what I'm going to share next, which is full of hope and a call and an invitation for us to engage in God's loving purposes. So we're going to have a short break now. Johnny, I'll leave you to decree how long that break is.
Thank you. Thanks, Roy, so much. We're just going to take a short break. I think Mike is going to put a 5-minute counter up. So 5 minutes, everyone. You can go, and hopefully your kettle is modern enough to boil water in 5 minutes, and get yourself a cup of tea or whatever you'd like. And let's be back sharp 5 minutes. Thanks so much, Roy. Looking forward to the second half. Back, everyone. It's great to have you all here again, and we're looking forward to Roy speaking again, taking us through the second half of his talk. So I'm just going to hand straight over to you, Roy, and let you go from here.
Thank you. Welcome back. And I hope that we can engage and interact on some of the things that were shared in that first session, but more particularly things from this second session. I concluded by saying that we stand at a crossroads like Jeremiah's day. And Jeremiah, I think, gets a bad press. He's regarded as the depressive prophet. He's somebody who certainly faces the reality. And I find myself a little bit identifying with him. You know, when I hear some church leaders talk about, oh, it's all going to be okay now, we're just going to get back to normal, it'll be fine. And to me, they speak of the contemporaries of Jeremiah's who were saying, peace, peace, when there was no peace. The world is being shaken. And I think we do stand at crossroads. But Jeremiah was not the pessimist. He actually went on in the book of Jeremiah. You can read about it. He brings a future and a hope. He talks about God bringing a future and a hope, but actually it was finding a future and a hope in a different place. It was finding in a place of exile. It was learning how to sing the Lord's song in a strange land. The old familiar ways were no longer going to pertain to the new situation. And no kind of looking back in order to be kind of somehow romantic or, you know, just reminiscent and nostalgic and yearning for. No, it's actually about discovering what God was saying and doing in the new place in which they found themselves. We all view life through different paradigms and lenses. And I want us to view our lens through that of exile and the experience of the Celtic saints who found themselves in a period of history when the church was in exile. And I've shared this story a number of times, but when I moved to Wooler in the Cheviot Hills of North Northumberland, which is near the Scottish border, over nearly 30 years ago now, I moved with my wife and my 4 children. And in the top attic room of our terraced house, there was a large wooden toy chest. And for my 2 youngest children, Joshua and Francesca, their eyes, you know, just saw this thing, and their like eyes were popping out their heads. This large, colourful toy chest, and they opened the top of the chest, and they dug out all these like things they'd never seen before. There were bits of clockwork railway. There were old dinky cars. There were educational toys, which basically meant you had a little man on a pole and you put bits of his body in and then you decapitated him. Good educational toys of the 1950s. And as I was watching on, I was seeing my children discover new things, whereas I, as their watching parent, was rediscovering things that were part of my inheritance, my childhood. And for a lot of people, when it comes to Celtic spirituality and the experience of the Celtic saints, that period in history from the 5th through to the 7th, 8th century, when God raised up a movement that were called the Celtic saints, what we're discovering today is people unearthing their stories, unearthing their spirituality. And I describe it like a treasure chest that might speak powerfully into our contemporary situation today. So I just want to run through some of these characteristics of the Celtic saints that might shed light and bring inspiration and illumination and wisdom by which we might live today. You cannot interpret or understand the lives of the Celtic saints without recognizing that their roots are to be found in the desert monastic tradition of the church. Theirs was a wisdom tradition. We live in a culture and a world which has esteemed information and knowledge to be the great thing. We just, tap into Google, just get information, produce policy reports and documents and initiatives and strategies. But what I would suggest that we can learn from both the desert monastic tradition and Celtic spirituality, which was like applied desert spirituality, is wisdom by which to live. Jen led us in that lovely meditation, almost like a mindfulness exercise, a contemplative exercise. What the Celts did is they had this balance and rhythm, this equilibrium between prayer and action, between contemplation and engagement with the world. Now, that's a great challenge for you YWAMers, because just basically, you're action men and women. You just do stuff. You've all got the genes of Jen, who just kind of like just wants to, we're doing lots of stuff. But actually what Jen has learned in recent years is the wisdom that comes from silence and solitude that informs our engagement and our activity, our involvement with others. Rowan Williams, who was the former Archbishop of Canterbury, has just released a new book on learning from the East, the Orthodox way, a different approach to understanding of heaven and earth, the connectedness between the environment and the earth upon which we stand and are called to tread gently, and the world in which we live. There's much to be learned from the roots of Celtic spirituality that are to be found in the Orthodox traditions of the church. Discipleship was a really clear thing. It seems to me that, it's not, it sounds like a simple jibe, but it's not. But, so much of my time as a minister of the gospel has seen people put so much emphasis on, managing and building and planting churches. And if we put the same amount of time and energy into embracing the Great Commission, which was to go and make disciples, it wasn't to plant churches, it was to go and make disciples. Churches come into being as people encounter Jesus and become his disciples. But it seems to me as if we've got the cart before the horse. And what the Celts did is they were a movement of discipleship, of spiritual formation that engaged the landscape of what we in Northumbria Community talk about, the landscape of the heart, the inner landscape. Proverbs 4:23, pay attention to your heart, for from it flows life. And those major life issues of money, sex, and power are addressed in relationship with God and being a disciple of Jesus. Strong emphasis upon community, the arena where the fruit of the Spirit is expressed, where relationships with God and with one another is known. The fragmentation of contemporary society, the inability to either live with ourselves and live with our neighbor, particularly if they're different, is a stark reality. And the good news of the gospel is that actually not only are we reconciled to God, but reconciled to one another. And it seems to me that one of the great strengths of YWAM and other organizations and movements like YWAM is that capacity to build, to nurture, and to model and to give expression to what the community of Jesus, or what the Quakers describe as the society of friends, looks like in our changing, hostile, partisan world, where the welcoming of the stranger, looking for Christ in the stranger's guise, being hospitable. Hospitality, I think that was one of the themes that you're looking at in this series of videos and lectures. The strong relational element. I don't know if anybody else is like me, but I'm just absolutely sick to the back teeth of programs, running programs. I mentor and I train people for church ministry, and I say to them, if I get the occasion to speak at their, well, certainly in their early weeks of training and as they conclude their training, and some at their ordinations and inductions, God has not called you to be a project manager running the programs of the church. We need to recapture relationships mattering above all things. What we do should flow out of our relationship with God and one another. Whereas often we have programs that people have to fit into in order to make the institutional thing kind of work. And we need to rediscover that at the heart of the gospel is relationship with God and one another and our neighbor. Celtic spirituality was also infused with incarnational thought and practice, spirituality. The essence of their spirituality was incarnational engagement where they were. So they drew most of their inspiration. You'll know, those of you who live in Ireland, that many of the Celtic crosses in Ireland from the kind of 5th, 6th, 7th century were actually carvings of the Gospels. And the most favored Gospel carvings, inscriptions, were that of John's Gospel, because it was from John's Gospel and the Johannine tradition, as opposed to the Petrine tradition, that the Celtic saints derived inspiration from. So John 1:14, the word becoming flesh and dwelling among us, full of grace and truth. The Jesus who, appears and, talks to some guys and then goes down to a wedding at Cana in Galilee, is a Jesus who is engaged, living in the world. And I think one of the things that COVID and the pandemic has done is has given us opportunity to really be engaged with our neighbors in our neighborhoods and to rediscover community, to rediscover solidarity with our neighbor, that we're not isolationists. You quoted the poet, and it's John Donne, another poet, who said, "No man is an island." We were not made, if we're made in the image of God, we're made for community. Those of you from Africa know well the whole concept of Ubuntu. I think the Celts modeled in their kind of expression of being together as a community, more models of synagogue rather than temple. I was a church minister in local churches for nearly 14 years before founding with others the Northumbria Community. And I think back now, so much of church practice is rooted in a kind of temple model. People go off to the temple on a Sunday. People go off to the public service on the Sunday. People go off and then just get on with their lives the rest of the week. I think in these, I realize synagogue is not spelled correctly there on that presentation, misprint. But I think we have a great opportunity to rediscover synagogue, to rediscover, if you like, church and community in the home, in the missional communities, in the places where people are gathering, not in those places that are the religious buildings. In fact, the church that I was involved in pioneering way back in the 1980s in Teesside, they're discussing at the moment whether their building is superfluous to their needs, or if they have a building, it's far more used to the community and running things like the baby bank than is their need to be meeting in it on a Sunday. Missional listening to the heartbeat of God, listening to what the Spirit of God is doing in our neighborhoods, beyond the walls of the church, looking for the kingdom of God in the streets, and then responding and going where God is doing things rather than decreeing how God should do things and what God should be doing. Missional listening, kinship, friendship. And I think one of the greatest gifts that we can give to one another in the world is the gift of friendship and of kinship and of support. The leadership models within the Celtic tradition, for example, the abbots and abbesses guarding the ethos, ensuring that communities lived what they taught, embracing their monastic rules of life. And then the bishops who were the wanderers, the peregrinati, who were those who journeyed for the love of God, sharing and taking the good news. Women, I mean, the Celtic Church would look askance at the debates that have gone on in recent years within our own church, contemporary church circles. They would kind of go, well, what's the issue? The issue, or if they did have a point of view, they would say this is actually more about power than anything else, rather than gender. They planted the gospel and they allowed the church and community to emerge. It seems to me that so much of our efforts have been on kind of, like, we need to plant a church, let's get a building, let's gather, let's meet, let's worship, let's, get people in, and then reach out and then attract them in. And it just seems to me that what the Celts did is so helpful for our changing contemporary society. When we're almost in, when I was at Bible college, it wasn't called missiology, it was called mission studies back in the 1970s, where 3 generations removed from any real association with church and Christianity, you had a missionary situation. That's a great opportunity. I find it so much easier talking to the tradesmen here, none of whom have had any experience of church whatsoever, just impressions that they've formed from people that they've worked with or churches that they've been commissioned to do some work on. I find it so easy to share with them about the good news of Jesus because it was a missionary situation. And it's about sharing the good news of the gospel, not saying, right, in order for you to hear this good news of the gospel, you need to come to a church service. Because there's no way that these guys that I have got to know, some of whom have become friends, are going to step over the threshold of any church buildings into a culture that is so alien from their way of thinking and understanding life, let alone faith. The Celts had a very holistic, there was no sacred secular divide to their spirituality. They had a deep appreciation of nature and when all the issues about global warming and climate change and the crisis of environment, the biodiversity, the economy, the ecology, Celtic spirituality speaks not as pantheistic, but of a deep appreciation of God and what God has created. There was the embracing of the arts for the Celtic saints. They used their arts to help them discover their human potential. Everybody is creative. Anybody who's made in the image of God is therefore creative. And I think our Western, certainly methods of education have often been suppressing of creativity. The Bible was really key. The Bible shaped their lives and the way in which they responded to the challenges and issues of their day. I was just reading about the different, not Celts, the Levelers. The Levelers were a very radical group of people who, in the time of the English, we didn't have a civil war. We had an industrial revolution. We were kind of kept from having a civil war officially. And the Levelers were people in the midst of all the unrest that was going on in 18th century Britain. They were kind of saying, actually, there has to be a different way in which we live. And the inspiration for many of the Levelers was the Bible itself. And the Bible shaped and gave a worldview that led to good things happening for the rebuilding of society. The care for the poor. One of the things that I was reflecting on, I was down in the south of England preaching last week, was thinking about the story in Luke's gospel about the Good Samaritan and the righteous Pharisee, and thinking about the conversation with my tradesman and this challenge about the church. Where is the church? It's actually, I think, what society in the chaos and crisis that we're in, I think what society needs more than anything is for us as disciples of Jesus to be the Good Samaritan rather than the righteous Pharisees. I leave that with you to ponder and reflect on. Signs and wonders were part of the experience of the Celtic saints, and yet they were rooted in ordinary. They saw miracles and signs and wonders, but they didn't run off and issue a whole video conference about how to do this and how to do that. They just got on with stuff. They were rooted in ordinary, everyday life. It stops us from becoming religious fruitcases, you know. They were wanderers for the love of Christ. They wandered for the love of Christ. They were not settlers. If God called them to go somewhere, they went, and they went with the support of their communities. And there was, finally, in conclusion, there was in the wisdom of Celtic spirituality, both stability, which was their rootedness in God, and movement. There are lots of movements that are emerging, many of which are quite frightening, particularly in the political spectrum and in the religious spheres, but there are also movements spearheaded often by younger people in relation to the environment and ecology. Some of the more radicalized movements are very disturbing. Movements need good roots. And what Celtic spirituality was, it was a movement of the Holy Spirit that affected change and transformation, which was eventually to shape European civilization for good, but it was rooted, it had stability in the rootedness of God. And I think the challenge for those of us who are kind of activists, you know, my background is unchurched background, then came to faith outside of the church, and then pitched into charismatic and evangelical circles, was actually movement, activity, engagement, and busyness, and thinking that's the way to get on with life. And then you take a look at Jesus and you see this lovely balance between prayer and action, between contemplation and engagement, or in these words, stability and movement. Thomas Merton, I close. Thomas Merton was not a Celt, but he did give a lecture that I listened to on a tape. He recorded it in the late 1960s. And the only infuriating thing is he talked about the Celtic saints, but you know, I needed to inform him that's a football team. But anyway, bless him. He talked about the Celts, and he observed the Celts. He saw them as communities of hope. And I conclude with this: in a world of doing, they put the emphasis on being. In a world of frenetic activity, contemplation. In a world of complexity, simplicity. In a world of fragmentation, unity and diversity. In a world of individualism, they expressed community. In a world of greed, there seemed to be generosity. In a world of pace, the Sabbath rest. In a 24/7 world, that's interesting, that's not a new phrase, the Celts had rhythm. Where there was power, they brought servanthood. In a world that favored the rich, they reminded themselves and others of God's heart for the poor. And in a world of risk aversion, they were adventurers. And in a world of protocol, my goodness, these are nearly 50 years ago, with all health and safety and protocol and policy decisions, the Celts were men and women who were passionate for love of God. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Roy, for your presentation. And I think, you know, Mike has been recording this, and in the coming week, it'll be put up on the ELLC website. And there'll be time there for people in your bases to unpack what he's talked about, because I feel like we could probably spend a week unpacking some of those lessons from the Celtic saints there. Roy, so thanks so much for your presentation. What we're going to do now is break up into breakout rooms, not breakup rooms, breakout rooms. And I'm going to put a couple of questions in the chat here, which are just very simple questions. I think Mike is putting it on a slide. And just you know, feel free in your breakout room to follow wherever the conversation leads. If there's things that Roy said, follow on from him, you know, talk about it, and just talk among yourselves. But these two questions that I've just put up, you should see it in your chat box. Maybe a way that you could begin the conversation. How do we move on in post-COVID times, if you want to call this post-COVID, without picking up everything that we had pre-COVID? What are those consumerist, individualist ways that we want to leave behind? How do we more go into community, and etc.? And then what can YWAM offer to Europe in these days of change? So I think we have, how long did we say, 15 minutes, Mike? Is that right, Tove? So Mike is going to put you into groups and just encourage you to join those groups and have rich conversation. And we'll see you back after that for a short panel discussion, and then I'm going to share some closing words.
So welcome back, everyone. Or people are on their way back, at least. I see Geneva is back. Andrew is back. Yeah. That was an amazing talk. I'm so happy that it was recorded. I definitely am going back to listen to that again, and probably just send it to a few people as well. I had Andrew right in the middle of it. My wife so needs to listen to this, but she would like to, she will enjoy this. Yeah, coming back. You're coming back. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good time. Breakout groups. I want to apologize from the very beginning. I lost my connection and frozen. I think kept talking, so I don't know. I hope it went just fine. But I think this talk with Roy has just been absolutely amazing. I have taken notes and scribbled, and I bet you have as well. So I just want to say right now, we'll just have a few minutes where it's possible to give feedback, have comments, questions. But I suggest you just stick up a hand, and then Mike is gonna unmute you. So if you can just say, let's say the first couple of minutes here, you know, what was a major takeaway or major thing that you want to hold onto and take from this talk of Roy's? You can also just write in the chat right now, just like a major takeaway, maybe something from your breakout group right now that stood out from your time. Yeah, we have Kyle from Belfast. You're unmuted.
Oh, there we go. I didn't think it would let me unmute.
Yeah.
I was just like, everything you said was amazing, and I really appreciated it. Very encouraging. I think the thing that stood out overall is if we lose Jesus Christ in our focus, we lose everything.
That's a very good point, isn't it? Thank you. So what is it that we need to pick up, or what do we not pick up from pre-COVID times, I should ask rather? What are some things that you talked about in your group? Again, you can write in the chat or just put up a hand. What do we not want to pick up in a sense of not going back to normal? Question is if it ever was a normal. Dickie writes, also for us as YWAM, rethink program focus versus relationship into communities, focus on seeing what God is doing already. And Miranda is agreeing. What do we not need to pick up again? I think all the churches can ask the same question, what not to pick up apart from program. Yeah, Elaine.
I think we talked a little bit about how tricky it is not to pick up things again, because we are kind of longing to get back to how the familiarity. And also when we're involved with churches or other institutions who seem to want to go back to normal, then you almost feel like you're getting dragged along. Even if we learn some things, people are scared to stay in that unfamiliar place. And we talked about just the challenge of how you're brought along with the crowd, really, as you go back to church and they go back into how things used to be. And actually that's quite depressing for me. I find that really challenging, because you want to hold on to the good that we learned, but other people want to go back to where it was before because that's what they know and that's safe and that's comfortable. And so it's really challenging to stay in that place of stepping away from the crowd. I guess we talked about that in my group.
Yes. We talked about that in our little group as well, a little staff group, you can say. So Roy, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that. You had a few comments there.
Well, I can certainly appreciate where Elaine's coming from. I think it's really difficult to lead people in a liminal place between what is and what may be. It's not as though we can give people a great vision and say it's going to look like this, it's going to be like that, we're going here. Actually, we don't know. We're in this in-between space. And I think leading in a period of liminality, exile, requires not so much just the prophetic that kind of analyzes and portrays and provokes, but we need the pastoral to understand how people feel very threatened by change. And people have been wearied and are anxious by the experience of COVID, and also the people who've been socially isolated from others. So we do need to find a way of actually being community together. But I just think this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for the church to stop doing what doesn't work, to take a really good hard look at, are we fulfilling the great commandment, loving God with heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving our neighbor as ourselves? And are we really fulfilling the Great Commission to go into all the world? We have an opportunity because it's almost like God, for me, shut the doors of the church buildings to get us out into the world. And now we're saying, no, we'll go back in and do attractional Christianity again. Attractional Christianity does not work. It relates to less than 5% of the population of all our European countries. So why would we put all our energies into reaching the 5% when, youth with a mission, the mission is to the world. The 95% are not going to be reached by doing what we've been doing before. And it seems to me that lockdown has just provided an opportunity for God to say, for goodness sake, stop what you're doing. And think and ask the question, what does it mean to be the church? We've got an opportunity to be all non-conformists and actually not mirror the attitudes and the policies of the state and the ways of the world, and to discover once again what it means to be communities of hope. But it's a hard place, Elaine. It's a hard place. It's a really hard place. And it takes a great deal of wisdom and courage and compassion to be able to keep people in a liminal place, uncertain about what leadership is, the whole phase. We all go through phases in church. Vision setters. I mean, vision setters is what the business community was doing about 20 years ago, but the church got into about 10 years ago. It's very difficult now to be vision setters, because actually we're in a place where we should be asking more questions than delivering answers. How then shall we live? How do we seek God? How do we live out the gospel? We don't know, but God, take us on that journey by your Spirit, and keep our eyes, as Kyle said, fixed on Jesus, who is a pioneer, and pioneers break new ground.
Brilliant. Just keep the comments going on the side here in the chat, but we will move into a panel chat. So thank you for also responding here to Elaine's comment. So can we go into our panel now? We will have Jen, who gave a fantastic word there to start with, our reflection. To start with, we will have Roy in the panel. We will have Miranda Heathcote. We will have Ian.
Is Tove frozen? I should maybe take over from Tove. Is everyone else? Can everyone hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Right. So, Tove, whenever you come back to the world. So, Tove was going to ask the first question. So now I'm going to ask the first question. So this is a question that kind of came to my mind as you were talking. I remember, Roy, in Milan at a Western Europe leaders gathering about 4 or 5 years ago. We had Neil Cole, who you've probably heard of. He kind of speaks about church, whatever, new church kind of stuff. He talked about, he kind of gave this prophetic word at the very end about arcs, and that YWAM, he felt like YWAM was called to create arcs. And I felt like I've often shared that since, because I felt like it really connected with me as YWAM being a place that doesn't just run programs. You're talking about church, not just running programs, but getting out into the world, relating to people, loving people. And what would it be like if our YWAM bases became these kind of arcs of relationship, not just program-driven kind of institutions, but kind of places where people could feel belonging. I wonder, do you have any reflections? If we start maybe with you, Miranda, just what are some of your reflections on what Roy shared, and even this idea that I was kind of sharing there a little bit about, could YWAM bases be places where they kind of become arcs of belonging and places where people, even unchurched people, feel welcome? Do you want to speak into that? And then maybe Ian as well? Don't know if that's clear. You're muted, Miranda. Miranda, you're muted.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. I tried to unmute myself, but it's not possible. Hi, everybody. Hi, Roy. Yeah, well, in our breakout room, we were talking about just that, actually, about the difference between kind of having a community that we think of as an enclosed space that exists for its own programs and meetings and all the important things that we love to do, versus a community, well, getting out into the community, but also having spaces where we invite people in. So we were just talking about the importance of hospitality, which is great because that's our theme for the ELC this month. But how those kind of bridging places, those invitational spaces, seem to happen most easily around food and meals and tables. So we were just wondering together at whether there's a greater invitation into hospitality in this next season, and what that would look like for us to be creating intentional spaces, not just kind of opening up the space with nothing kind of in our minds necessarily, but really being thoughtful and intentional, but making it easy for people to connect. So I don't know if that answers your question, Johnny, but that's what came to mind.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Miranda. Ian, any thoughts you've got?
Yeah, just really again struck by the idea of the Celtic Christianity model being that hub of a community, and just inviting people in to see life done as believers, and what does that look like? Because I don't know about you guys, but Searle can often be the base up in the hill, which kind of gets a reputation for who knows what in the local community, because it's just hard for people to see inside the building. So yeah, it's a good question for us to say, well, in which ways do people legitimately see inside? Because it can really demystify an awful lot of stuff. Just I was struck by the Celts and how, whether it be hospitality, whether it be, just people coming in and seeing what they do, brought them to know Jesus. And so that should be the same for us, hopefully.
So Roy, obviously you're not a YWAMer as such, although, of course, I think you're very YWAMer. Or maybe we're all Northumbrians. But what are some of your reflections on how an organization, or we'd like to call ourselves a movement, a tribe, how can we become more how can we create arcs of belonging, or is that something we should aspire to, and what would that look like?
Well, you describe yourself as a movement. I think any movement needs to continue to try to seek to be a movement rather than an institution. I think that's movements move. When movements stabilize and, they soon fossilize. So keep moving. I think when Ian was talking there about the Celts, in their enclosures, they weren't closed. They weren't a cloistered community. And there was the symbol, the Irish word is a muncher. That was their enclosure, if they built like a little village. But there was a thing called the open gate. It basically was an opening in the enclosure which didn't have a gate on it at all. And it was symbolic for the community to actually, our calling is to be in the world as well as in the community, in the world, in the community. And people could interact and become part of that community. I would say to YWAM, I hope you become a lot looser in terms of being very committed at the core, but a lot looser around the edges. So like with Northumbria, we have people who are not yet Christians who feel part of us as a community. They feel a sense of belonging, they feel welcome, they're the recipients of our hospitality. And I think the world needs more committed at the core, but looser at the edges communities. And I think YWAM is kind of ideally placed to be able to do that kind of stuff with your connections with people. The other thing for me is that actually, an ark for me speaks of a safe place. It's also a place of provision, of food. And that's why your month, is it a month theme, Miranda, on hospitality? I think hospitality is really what God is saying. The Fresh Expressions movement, they did a report from anecdote to evidence a few years ago now. And the fruitful initiatives in Fresh Expressions, the one dominant characteristic of all the fruitful expressions was hospitality. It's not rocket science, So all these amazing programs and amazing worship bands and great initiatives, actually, it could have saved a lot of money just by being hospitable and welcoming. And I think, it's a little while since I've been at Ancuin, but I think just that creating those communities of welcome and hospitality is pretty key to folk. The final piece I'd say on that is we assume that we're acting as the hosts, welcoming people, which is really important. But I think God turfing us out in lockdown has actually invited us to become more the guests with people. So we become guests at other people's tables as opposed to simply being the host. Johnny, very, very quick story. The other week, I was really tempted because we could have gone to church service that morning for the first time in ages into our local church here. And it's a great church, the Alnwick Baptist Church. But our neighbours, it was a lovely morning, and our neighbours next door, they were having coffee at breakfast outside. And we had been away. We'd been out of our house for ages because of the building work. And they said, Roy, do you fancy joining us for a coffee? So the answer was yes. I didn't even have to pray about it. I just went. And so I then had a cup of coffee, and then I had some toast. And I decided that actually, it was time. I probably should be thinking about going to a church service, but I didn't. And I spent the next hour and a half with my neighbours because the kingdom of God was there. The Spirit of God was working. And when I shared that with my pastors, they rejoiced and affirmed and encouraged me in the stance and decision that I had taken. And it was just great. It was just really good. And, I think that's a little silly example about just cooperating with what the Spirit of God is doing in your neighborhoods. and being churches that are permission giving as opposed to like controlling. We've got to get rid of all the flipping control that goes on in society and the church. Really do.
Amen. Tove, over to you.
Yeah, I just want to say amen to that as well. I was just thinking as you were sharing about, belonging, there was a quote from last week's hospitality leadership lounge where Alfonso said that hospitality is treating someone like they belong before they belong, until they belong. That was my favorite quote for that talk, it's just brilliant. So treating like they belong before they get there. But I have a question here. I think that's for you, Jen. So we are given the opportunity to stitch this new garment, and one that fits both humanity and nature. I love that from this quote from Sonia Taylor. But what garment would the Celts be stitching that would fit post-pandemic humanity and nature? So what do you think that they would be stitching that will fit post-pandemic humanity and nature?
Good question. Oh, well, I think it'd be a fair bit of crack, to be honest.
We need to interpret that for the Europeans.
It'd be a bit of
crack. What is crack?
Bit of fun, bit of.
Yes, it's not a drug. It's not a drug.
Not a drug. No, spelled differently.
That's an Irish word.
I think it's a good question. What garment would the Celts be stitching together? And I think for me, just to point back to something that Roy said that I found quite profound I think we're very used to being the ones wherein lies the answers, and perhaps that we should be more leaning towards what are the questions that we should be asking to change our posture from producing and creating and attracting to listening, serving, and welcoming. So I think that is the garment that probably humanity is ready to. We've shaken off maybe the jumper that was too tight, that we've outgrown, that's become a little bit suffocating, itchy, doesn't fit us anymore. And what are we going to create together? Let's make something big enough to where all people groups, regardless of identity, orientation, or anything, firstly, everyone is welcome. A garment that's big enough to include every expression of humanity in all of its various forms, without changing, without augmenting itself in any way, or having to subscribe to any sort of rule. I think something big enough that would cloak us all. And one that sort of turns its ear, I think, to listening, and instead of offering things, can just create a space of understanding, welcome, introspection, and listening, possibly. But I could be.
Yeah.
Very good.
That's great.
Do you want to add anything, Roy, to that?
Well, I love the imagery of the garments that Brené Brown talked about. I think, what else? Authenticity, a garment of authenticity that is real. I long for the church to be more a place where people are honest about the questions, as opposed to always contending to try and deliver the answers. Because actually the watching world sees through the hypocrisy that we haven't got all the answers. We follow the one who is the way, the truth, and the life, but we haven't got all the truth and all the ways and all the life. I think friendship, the spirit of the age is partisan, attritional, it's sectarian. And I think, and again, I think YWAM is placed well with this to be able to wear the garment of friendship, as Jen said, across all the, instead of putting restrictions on before people come in, let's just welcome people. And I think the fruit of the Spirit, the world needs people to demonstrate gentleness and peaceableness and kindness and goodness. These things speak volumes, because what they do is they speak Christ into the world. So yeah.
Thank you. I think we'll just end with that. That was beautiful. Yeah, thank you, Johnny.
Okay, well, guys, I think we're going to end the panel discussion there. I'm sorry, we could have gone on a long time, and we wanted a bit longer, but we're running a bit out of time, and we didn't want to lose that, to lose any of you. So I think we'll leave it there. But thanks, Miranda. We really always appreciate your wisdom. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Jen. Of course, you're brilliant. And I just want to thank Roy. Thank you as well for joining us today, Roy. I think you have sowed a bunch of really rich seeds in the soil of YWAM in Europe here, and I really hope these seeds can really germinate in our hearts and in our bases around Europe. And yeah, see us really move. As you said, I love that imagery of movements moving, and that's a good thing. So I think I'm just going to say a few words. Is this right, Tove? This is my moment? So I'm going to just say, probably many of you may have heard news, breaking news that Jen and I have decided, really after a number of months of reflection, to step out of YWAM. So I joined YWAM as a 7-year-old kid. My mom Val is there in the group. We left New Zealand to get on an airplane, a family of 4, as the youngest of 4, to join YWAM. And I've kind of never in my heart ever left. And of course, we may continue in forms in some way, have a connection, but we have felt the Lord leading us out. Over the last 25 years, since I did my DTS, I was influenced at a young age by reading Floyd McClung, talking about living on the devil's doorstep. And that led to us, Jen and I, moving into the Shankill Road in Belfast and trying to imagine what a DTS and what YWAM could look like in the midst of an inner city where there are walls that separate Protestants and Catholics. Instead of going to the nice places, what would it look like to incarnate the life of God in rough places? I love the way Roy talked about Celtic community there, because in some ways, although there's this beautiful imagery of this cross and it looks very romantic, I think the Celts were about incarnating in the world in which they lived. They didn't live in a fantasy world; they lived in the real world, and we are called to do that. And we feel, Jen and I, after all these years, after being in the Shankill for 8 years, and then we moved down here to Rostrevor 11 years ago. We moved to this beautiful space. We could live here forever, we really could. And I think that was the recognition we had a few months ago. We could live here forever. We're safe, and possibly we're on a plateau. And maybe God is calling us to pioneer once again and to move out of this safe place into the vulnerable space of moving out into the world. And I've taken on a role as the program manager for public theology, the Corrymeela Centre. Corrymeela is Ireland's oldest and largest peace and reconciliation organization. So I'm going to be keeping going on the trajectory that I've been going on, but just using a different vehicle. Jeff Fountain says public theology is what YWAM really needs to get a hold of in these days. He said public theology is what does the Bible have to say to Monday to Saturday? And, or his dad, Win Fountain, would have called the other 100 hours. What do we do with all these hours when we're not in church and not in a Bible study, but, we're out in the world? And what does theology have to do with Brexit and COVID and immigration? And so we're being invited maybe into a slightly, in some ways, not as big a space as YWAM, but in some ways bigger, if you can never say those things. And this is going to be my last Futurewise. So I guess, unless I somehow, there's a 6-month, probationary time with this job. So maybe, in 6 months, I'll come back with my tail between my legs, We're handing over the base here in Oncuin, this community to Scott Sotomayor and his wife Yasmin, and a lovely leadership team. We're going to be moving out of YWAM Ireland, but we'll still stay connected in some ways. And I very much, how do you kind of leave YWAM? I don't know. We always say once YWAMer, always a YWAMer. So I guess I'm still in. But at the same time, I think we all know that I'm taking a step out of a very real vehicle. And many YWAMers have been like brothers and sisters to me for years, and will continue to be, I think. So I just wanted to kind of share some thoughts as I step out of this space. But Futurewise, I think, is the sense of, could YWAMers gather several times a year, listen to non-YWAM voices, and that speak into our mission and challenge us about the future. And I'm excited that Tove and others are going to continue on that path of exploring what the future holds to us in this mission. So I don't know if I've said that well enough, if there's anything else I need to say, but so thanks everyone, and for being here today. And I love YWAM. I've been part of this tribe for years, and we'll keep that way. So
thank you so much, Johnny, and Jen, and Daniel. Now I'm gonna cry as well. You can have one as well. Thank you so much, Johnny, for all you've done. I mean, we have had your farewell a little bit in Albania just the other week, so don't want to make a big speech here, but just really want to thank you for heading up Futurewise as well. So you gave life to this, and it's been a joy to work with you. And I think there's a little surprise coming in the door now. So thank you so much, Jasmine, for helping. So a little thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
Oh, I thought that was fun. I was about to shout.
And I think your mom want to say something too, it looks like.
Oh, I
Yeah.
can't speak.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Mom.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yes, so we'll probably pull you in again, Johnny, sometimes in the future, and hear what you're learning on your journey. Just want to thank you from here. Of course, this recording here, you can also see it on the ELC, in the archives. So this will forever stay there. We will have Futurewise in the future. The next one we are looking at having on the 7th of February. You'll hear much more about that later. But thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Johnny and Jen and Roy and everyone. Yeah.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Oh, that's lovely.
Bye.
Okay.
Oh, that was nice. Okay, baby. Is your mom okay?